Greetings and salutations, everyone. Welcome back to tonight's second half. Tonight's second half is actually going to be a abductees kind of interview about what occurred during their abduction. Before we get into it, though, a couple links. As you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, and my merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. The links to Patreon and PayPal are in the description below. My merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1, 2, and 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeffrey Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, the links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe, click the like button, and please leave a comment. It really does help, and it matters, guys. And now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's get on with tonight's second half, shall we? 8 months ago, I started to add a second half to the channel where I discussed paranormal, such as ghost, poltergeist, demons, etc., government cover-ups, alien agenda, dumbs. And 2 months ago, I changed the name from Dogman Encounters with Jeffrey Nadolny to Dogman and Paranormal Research with Jeff Nadolny. Since that time, I've been blessed to have Laura Eisenhower on to share some of her information and knowledge with us. And I have continued to share any kind of information that I get about alien agenda, secret government agendas with you guys, and I'm learning myself as I go along. I get fascinated by the abductees recalling their events that occurred during their abduction or kind of interaction. Now, since I started this, we've kind of discussed these secret government agendas with the alien agenda. And I should have added abduction into both. So secret government abduction agenda, alien abduction agenda. They go hand in hand, but sometimes they don't. This is a terrifying abductee experience that they are going to recall and recount right now with us. It is horrifying to even imagine something like this could happen to a person. Let's get into it. Pat is a 50-year-old divorced mother of grown children. She lives in Florida, but the story she relayed concerned an event that occurred in 1954 while she lived in Floyd's Knob, Indiana. Pat's memory of this event, as in the case of so many people who have had UFO experiences, was totally suppressed after the occurrence. It all came flooding back into her consciousness in 1986. Scenes of a brilliant orange ball of light, little gray entities both inside and outside the farmhouse, and the most disturbing of all, military personnel on the property. I thought I must be crazy when these memories came back, Pat said, but they were so strong and real. I finally got in touch with my brother and sister and asked if they recalled anything similar. My sister Rose said she recalled the aliens and the military people as well. But although my brother didn't remember the orange ball of light, he clearly remembered the military personnel and some of his interactions with them. Through extensive conversations, letters, and drawings from Pat and her siblings, the following extraordinary scenario emerged, raising serious questions, not only about the nature of the alien abduction agenda, but also about the involvement of our military with citizens who have been the target of such interactions. The setting was a 16-acre farm near Floyd Knob, Indiana. In the summer of 1954, 11-year-old Pat lived there with her mother, stepfather, grandmother, and 9-year-old brother and 6-year-old sister. One night, several family members saw a large orange ball of light appear outside of the farmhouse. Pat had already gone to bed, but was awakened by either her grandmother or her sister to look out of the window. In the sky, she saw the orange light sitting motionless at first, then moving rapidly out of sight around the back of the house. I remember vaguely thinking, I will go back to bed to wait. It seems to me that I knew they were coming, Pat said. I saw my mother running to the kitchen door to make sure it was locked, and to see the ball come over the yard. I remember thinking, it won't do any good to lock the door. They will come in anyway. It is as if I knew what to expect. Suddenly felt sleepy, but didn't remember going back to bed. Her next memory was of a multicolored light slowly spinning around her room in total silence, emitting blue and purple and violet hues. She got out of bed and went to the window where she saw a gray floating just outside. Look at those eyes, she thought. They can film us. The gaze of the gray seemed to penetrate her entire being, and she sensed a familiarity with them. Don't be afraid, it communicated to Pat. You are a chosen child. We will not harm you. Pat turned around and saw several taller white entities coming into the bedroom. As they began to float her grandmother out of the door, Pat sensed the older woman's terror, and she too was feeling fearful. When the room was filled with strange beings, a spark shaft of light came down through the ceiling. Pat saw in the midst of the light a figure which she perceived as a blond-haired, blue-eyed Jesus in a robe. He took Pat's hand and said, "Don't be afraid, my child. These are mine," gesturing to the beings who were standing all around the room. The Jesus figure looked at Pat and said, "I am the light of the world." Then he was again surrounded by the sparking shaft of light, which ascended back into the ceiling and took him with it. She and her grandmother were floated out of the room by these entities. Passing by her mother's bedroom, Pat saw a brilliant white light coming from the room. 5 of the taller whites were around her stepfather's bed, and they seemed to be examining one of his atrophied legs, the result of polio. The glowing green bar of light, about 5 inches long, floating over him, continuing on through the house and out into the yard. Pat saw a bright, crystalline flying craft hovering low to the ground. A beam of light came out of the bottom of the craft and engulfed her. I remember my sister's blonde, curly head next to mine as we went up inside of the craft, Pat said. We were looking down at the ground, and she saw my mother and grandmother looking up like zombies. She could also see the entire yard was swarming with greys hurrying about the area. Although neither she nor Rose is certain of the exact sequence of events, they recalled a group of smaller gray beings near a ditch beside the cellar door. Rose saw the beings in a line walking across the board spanning the ditch, but Pat's memory included a line or a wall of fire in the ditch and a row of small gray skinny aliens wearing Chinese rice-padded hats with big brims. I was on one side of the long ditch, and they were on the other. They were mentally telling me, "Pass through the light. It will not burn you," which I was thinking at that time that I would get burned. The fire was not hot, and it was supposed to cleanse me. I did go through it to the other side, but I don't remember doing it or what happened after. After the light transported her and Rose into the craft, Pat recalled sitting on a table in a room with Grays present. A taller white came over with a file-type instrument and scraped skin from her inner forearm and the bottoms of her feet, clipped some hair, and then peeled away samples of her fingernails. "What do you need all of those pieces of me for?" she asked. "We are making a new you," the entity replied. "Are you an angel?" Pat inquired. "Yes," the entity told her, "but not like you have been taught." Pat was taken into another room where she lay on a table, above which was a dark instrument. One of the Greys came in and pulled down a tube from the device, which had a thin needle on the end. Pat became afraid, but the Grey told her, "This is the part you don't have to remember." Pat knew that the needle was about to be inserted into her right nostril, but before it happened, she passed out. Pat recalled another event during the physical exam, being fused with a silver light. "It was done from something over my body," she said. "Up high in the room, he, the alien, fused me into my head with a silver light. It will keep me from violent harm. It let me be perfect in human form for a few seconds. It was a protective light. I get the idea that when this silver light goes into my other body, I will be made into a new me. In other words, the new me will come to life with my soul in it. Pat came back to consciousness after the episode with the needle and found herself back in the first room on the table. She was crying because she couldn't stay with the Greys. When they told her it isn't time yet, she asked for a souvenir as proof of the experience had really occurred. The green healer rock she had seen above her stepdad's body. Although the aliens apparently gave her this device, they told her that it would not work properly for her, only for them. She was also told, "You are going to have to forget this." "Why?" Pat asked. "Because there are those who will tamper with your mind," Gray replied. Pat was returned to the house, where she saw all of her family sitting in the living room in a daze. "They look like zombies," Pat said. Even her stepfather was propped up on the floor, leaning against the sofa. She was placed in her bed and saw one of the Greys outside of her window gesturing farewell. She responded a wave and was immediately asleep again. The next day, there doesn't seem to have been any discussion about the previous night's events, but Pat's brother recalls that it was the day when the military personnel arrived. A white staff car, a green jeep, a white staff car, a green car, a jeep, and several white vans came onto the property carrying instruments and equipment. There was also a troop carrier with soldiers who proceeded to comb over the entire 16-acre farm. The large truck was hidden in the barn, and Pat's brother said that he had to move the animal feed to the smokehouse because the soldiers wouldn't let him into the barn once their equipment was stored there. "They came into our home and set up equipment in our living room," Pat recalled. "The army men wanted to talk to me the most, an 11-year-old girl with secrets in my head. But the beings told me I couldn't tell because there will be those who will tamper with my mind." And here they were, the tamperers, the army men. Everyone except her brother, who was allowed to go out in order to take care of the farm animals, was kept inside of the house for 4 days, in which the military personnel were present. Only her brother saw what was going on outside of the house. He remembers more than 20 soldiers brought in on a big truck and told to man their stations on the farm. 2 of the men stayed at the end of the driveway, and the others performed various duties on the ground. When he was allowed outside to take care of chores, Pat's brother remembers being questioned by a man dressed in a white lab coat who asked about the chickens and the pigs. "Are your pigs out there?" the man asked, gesturing, and the boy nodded. "Have the pigs been acting funny?" "No," the boy said. "Why?" The man said something about the minerals in the soil making the animals act strangely. Pat's brother said he felt comfortable with this man and was not afraid to answer his questions or to ask some of his own. He even asked if the man wanted a fresh mint, a favorite treat from a patch near the cellar. The man refused. "They're taking samples there and we'll be on our way," he explained. "When they were done, we'll get some." Pat said she was mad about being restricted. "I felt scared, like they would take away my family and put me somewhere like jail or something. But I also felt protected by the being who was my friend. I was called him a little boy then, but I knew the being was not a real little boy." 2 female doctors set up their gear in my parents' bedroom where Pat was given an injection, and it made me sleepy, she said. "And I lie on my mom's bed and some towels, and told them my story. I even told them, 'You're in my mom's room where the white glowing ones were. You don't belong here,' but they do." I asked Pat to start back at the beginning and tell me everything she could remember about this event. She put herself back into the 11-year-old frame of mind and began to relive the situation. "I see this man dressed up in a uniform of some kind, a full dress uniform, but it was brown," she said. "He has on a coat, jacket, and pants that match, and what I call a captain's hat. He is talking to my mom and grandma, holding a file envelope in his hand. He has thick, gray hair. There was another man in a dress uniform, and he took off his coat and rolled up his sleeves. His name was Mr. Donaldson. He's an army man, too, she explained, but the other people are setting up a 3 TV screen thing in our living room. It's a little taller than I was. Mr. Donaldson then opened up his arms on a machine and told Pat that the device looked like a robot. See, Pat, he said, if we open the panels out, they look like arms. So maybe you saw a robot like this? No, Pat told them adamantly. I did not see a robot. I saw a real little boy. She recalled the lady doctors clearly. One lady had a white coat, she describes. One was named Dr. Susan, and she had a light orange coat. Dr. Susan seemed to have brown blonde hair with bangs over her forehead, and the rest of her hair was pulled back off her face. She had what looked like stuff from a dentist's office set up in my mom's room. It had instruments on it, some kind. They were not, but I was not clear what they were. The real clear picture is of the shot thing. It was wrapped in cellophane or plastic, and there was a little hose that went with it. Both the shot thing and the hose were in the same clear plastic bag. Dr. Susan began to open the shot bag, and I got scared and asked her if I had to get a shot with that thing. Dr. Susan then directed Pat to Mr. Donaldson, who was in the living room speaking angrily to some men dressed in what she described as white moon suits holding white metal boxes without handles. He was saying, I told you to use the ones with handles. Pat said that the shot made her feel dreamy and willing to talk about her secret memories. She was upset that Mr. Donaldson didn't believe her. I always told the truth, Pat said, because my mom hates a liar. So, in my wide-eyed innocence, I told the army men about my visit with the beings, and I cried when they told me I didn't see what I thought I saw. They treated me like I was lying about it. After I cried, I guess Mr. Donaldson felt sorry for me because everyone started being sugar nice. But I didn't like that at all because I knew it was fake. Why did they say I didn't see a little boy? Why did such a wonderful thing as a visit get everyone upset and mad? And why did I have to get a shot? Someone asked about the glowing white beings, and Pat said they were angels. How do you know they were angels? Her interrogator asked. Because they told me so, Pat replied. And what else did they tell you, Pat? Did they tell you anything else? Yes, Pat answered. They told me a lot of things, but I can't remember now. Someday I will remember, but not now. Why can't you remember now? She was asked. Because, Pat replied, they said it's not time to remember, and besides, you were coming here, and I can't tell you because it's a special thing. When I'm a lot older, I'll remember what they said and what was going to happen. Did they tell you what was going to happen? Yes, they did. They told me about a bad time on Earth. I'm not supposed to talk about that. I can't remember now. Well, she admitted, some of it I remember, like the crystalline ship they were in. It was full of lights. And I called it the crystalline ship because it wasn't metal like a plane. The lights made everything work by itself, and they moved things without touching them, and even me. They moved me without touching me. They moved me up and down, and they were full of love, and they were protecting me with a silver light. I love them. One of the army men then asked her to describe the little boy's hair and clothes. Pat said she felt as if the army man was dumb, asking such questions. Don't you know, she told them, that the beings don't have hair, and they don't wear clothes. The little boy has really big slanty eyes that can film everything inside of me, in my head and in my soul. He talks to me in my head and does not use his mouth, because he only has a line there. He is very skinny, but he doesn't have to eat because he's an angel. I thought angels had wings, and I laughed because he laughed with his eyes because he knew what I was thinking about wings. I got scared because I knew he was really an angel. He knew what I thought, and only angels can tell you what you think all the time, except so can Jesus. So I thought in my head, do you know Jesus and the beings? And I filled up with love, feeling that kind of made me cry and know something special. And the being said, yes, in my head. I said, are you like the angels? And the being said, yes, but not as you have been taught. I wanted to stay with them and go back with them. Pat, stop for a minute, the interrogator interrupted. And let us ask you a question. You said you wanted to go back with them. Where did they go back to? I can't tell you that, Pat replied. I'm not supposed to tell you that part. But the angel said when it was time to go, they would come and pick me up. They promised. I made them promise me. I made them promise not to forget me, and I begged them to take me. But he said it wasn't time yet. I begged and cried and felt really sad. Mr. Donaldson asked me why I was crying, and I told him, because you're making me cry, and you're making me tell, and I'm not supposed to tell, and you think I'm lying, but I'm not. Okay, stop crying, Pat, Mr. Donaldson told her. Calm down and listen to my voice. I don't think you're lying, and we won't ask you any more questions if you tell us about your souvenirs. Where are they, Pat? Do you have souvenirs? Pat began to feel very stressful and mistrustful of the army men. She tried not to say anything more, but Mr. Donaldson kept badgering her. Where are your souvenirs? I cried, Pat said, and told him they were that they were mine, and why did he want them? I said they were in my cigar box under my bed. I wouldn't give them my box, but my sister went and got it for them. When they took my cigar box, which contained Pat's green healer rock, it was put into one of the metal boxes by the men dressed in white protective suits. I saw my grandmother sitting on my bed with little kids, and she was crying, Pat recalled. I asked her if the army men were going to hurt the little boy. Oh, Patty, the grandmother said, there is no little boy. I told her there was, too, because I sat with him and did things. She just cried some more, and then Mr. Donaldson showed me the triple TV thing and tried to convince me that I had seen something like it, a robot and not a little boy. I got really mad and told him, I saw a real little boy, not a robot. Well, Pat, he said then, maybe you just had a dream about the little boy. Was he in your dream? I didn't dream of him, Pat insisted. He was real. Pat, the man continued, it was a dream, a kind of dream that seems real. You did not see a real little boy because there are no such thing. Yes, I did, Pat said. And he came in an orange ball and looked in my window and filmed me with his eyes. Did the dream frighten you, Mr. Donaldson asked. It wasn't a dream, Pat said stubbornly. And I was only scared a little bit because he looked so different from me, because he was skinny and gray. But I knew he wouldn't hurt me. Pat remembered almost nothing else after the interrogation, although the military people were present for days. After the army men left, she recalled, my whole family seemed sad, kind of in a daze, and I had no memory of anything after that. We moved to town before my 12th birthday in August of 55. It wasn't until 86 that the memories of the aliens in the military came back. Pat does not want any personal public publicity because of these events, but she has asked to include the actual location and the date of this, Floyd Knob, Indiana, in 1954, in the hope that there may be people from the area who remember seeing military vehicles that came into town and thus can provide some verification of these things that her brother and her sister recalled. I asked if any other unusual events had occurred since then, knowing from my research that most abductees have reported multiple experiences in their lives. Pat, it turns out, was no exception. In the fall of 1962, making a trip to Kentucky with a friend, Pat got lost for a while before spotting a sign from Fort Knox. Laughing about the confusion, they retraced the route in search of their destination, but instead they ended up in a deserted train yard, sitting in the car with the engine Off. Pat said they felt as if they had just come out of some unremembered experience with no idea why the car was stopped. They never found their destination, finally gave up, returning home at dark. But later in a dream, Pat recalled being out of the car with her friend beside her. She saw a ripple of golden light like an elevator moving up at an angle, and angels on each side. She said they were respectful of the blond man who seemed like Jesus to her. Her friend was screaming hysterically, "They want you." Pat replied, "Don't be afraid, it's okay." She went up to the blond man, who was surrounded by a beautiful light. He talked to her about becoming a mother and about a seed of life. He said he had the power of all seeds in his hand, and at the end of the experience he held out his hand to her and showed her a seed, telling her it was for her benefit and not to fear. A few months later, Pat, who was now pregnant, moved to Florida. She remembers telling her husband that a baby would be a boy, but that it wouldn't be viable. I'm going to have it, but not keep it," she told him, unable to explain how she knew this. For the next several months, she and her 2 children lived in a garage apartment. One night, Pat came to consciousness just as she was walking into the apartment, as if she had been outside. Although she didn't recall being there, she felt odd, pleasant sensation and remembered thinking, "They came and got me." Nothing more seems to have happened at that time, and Pat continued to have her prenatal checkups, which showed that everything was progressing fine with the baby. But then in the 8th month, the doctor could not find a fetal heartbeat, and when she delivered a full term in May, the baby boy was a stillborn. The foreknowledge proved true. Later that same year, Pat remembers finding herself in a quiet room surrounded by grays and waiting for something. The gray she thought of her as friend appeared in the doorway, showing her a baby. He told her that she had a choice to see the baby. "No," Pat replied, "it's okay, it's fine. You'll take better care of it than I could." But in that brief glimpse, she saw a tiny, skinny baby with blue slanted eyes. She felt that somehow this baby was the repository for the soul of the child who had died at birth. And she said she felt trusting and thankful toward her friend for showing her that the little boy had, in a sense, survived. Of the memories which had surfaced in the past several years, none raises more questions than the Cocoon People. "I can't remember when the actual event might have occurred," Pat says. "All I recall is being in a large room with soft white lightning, and one of the Greys was there. I vaguely recall seeing a human male there, but not what he was doing. Part of the large room was filled with what looked like a sarcophagus-like boxes, and in these boxes were human forms. They were alive," Pat recalled, "but not animated. There was a white misty stuff all over them, and I knew the misty stuff kept them alive. I knew they were waiting to come to life in the future." The being asked Pat, "Do you want to see yours?" Pat said yes, and was shown a female body in one of the containers. "Don't ask how I knew it was female," she continued. "I just felt it. I saw a little bit of a human face through the mist, like a nose, mouth, eyes, definitely human. I knew this was connected with the 1954 visit, because I remembered they told me they were going to make a new me. I felt this cocoon was a new me. I felt that they were waiting for the resurrection," she said, "or reanimation, and we will all be able to see and talk with them here on earth. If I were to die now, I believe that my other body will house my soul when Jesus says it's time, and I too will come back. If I live through all the destruction to come in the new world, I will still need my other body, as this one I have will die away." In her mid-40s, Pat had another experience with the beings, and this time she recalled being in a room lit with a golden glow. She was taken to a desk-sized device, on top of which were circular openings. In each opening was a different colored vibrating light. and she was told to put her hands in the lights. As she did, she heard the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Each light made a different sound. That is the sound of your soul, the Grey told her. Pat understood that this had something to do with the inanimate human bodies she had been shown, bodies which didn't have a soul power activating them. In 1987, Pat had another possible experience, much more typical of the usual abduction reports, which included her young grandson. Was this a dream? She mused when relating it. I have no proof. I was at my daughter's house. It was nighttime. I seemed to have been floating to my grandson's room. I took his hand, and we floated together upright about 6 inches off of the floor. We floated out of the front door, out to the driveway, and stopped while the gate swung open to the road. There was about 10 or 15 beings across the road in the woods. They all rose up out of the woods at the same time. I could hear my grandson think, "Mama, can I play with those kids?" I thought back to him, "No, honey. These are special kids. They don't play like regular kids." We floated down the road to the cul-de-sac. There in the dead-end circle was a ship with red blips that went around it, a saucer. There was a door with a light. We floated up the ramp, and I saw my being friend, and then I don't remember any more. Anyway, my grandson and I went together on this trip, or I'd rather call it a dream, I'm not sure. Pat had a number of intensely affected experiences that occurred while she was in a meditative or dream state, and so she has been unable to feel confident if they were real. In some of these dream events, she has seen a variety of flying crafts. She has had apparent out-of-body experiences, and she has received telepathic communications. One such event, October of '92, seemed related to some of her previous experiences. I dreamt someone was talking to me mentally, she said, telling me things. I couldn't grasp the exact words, but I heard one sentence like this: "The destruction comes in 4 quarrons." Quarron is not a word we know, but I took it to mean 4 parts of some kind. Then I saw what I call a graft. I felt as though I was getting a gentle warning of a bad time on Earth, like it is very near to happening now. Such warnings had not only been given to Pat to various times in her life, but they have been part of many abductees' experiences, and are indeed one of the most commonly reported events in this phenomena. So are unexplained physical marks on abductee bodies, and here again Pat fits the pattern. In the summer of '93, Pat discovered an unusual design on her inner wrist, a circle of 6 dots, with a 7th dot in the center. This design, incidentally, was reported in a handful of cases in '91 and '92. And it may not be a coincidence that these cases have mostly come from Florida, where Pat lives. A couple of months after the design appeared, Pat had an experience relating to this circular pattern. "I had a dream on August 7th, in the middle of the afternoon," she explained. "It was one of those naps that make you hit the bed and you're out like a light. There were voices in my dream that sounded like soft whispers, and I began to listen more closely. There was something said about being innocent like a child, and this feeling flooded my whole body and soul. It felt like being in a state of pure innocence, without knowing anything about fear, hate, prejudice, a pure, wonderful state of being in love, secure, protected, and without sin, as we call it. I saw a scene from my childhood in the town I lived in. It looked like it did way back then. I saw myself, about 11 years old. My feeling in this dream was great. Then a voice said to me, "Get up, child, and look to the nebulous. It can take you there." And in my dream, I got up and unlocked my back door and looked up into the daytime sky and saw the most beautiful circle of lights, with one light in the middle, spinning around like marquee lights on a movie house, all spinning in a golden color. It was beautiful, and the voice said I could not go now because in that dream I was pleading to go to the nebulous now. When he said I couldn't go now, I begged him to let me see it when I was in my conscious mind. He said he would, but I haven't seen it yet. It was like the wondrous thing of another time in my life, but my overall feeling was that I would have to die to go to this nebulous. I woke up very groggy, like I was on drugs, and hurried to write it down before I could forget. The nebulous design was the same as the design on my wrist. Pat felt she understood what nebulous meant, associating it with the lighted circular object she first saw, but nebulous is an adjective rather than a noun. Nebula is the proper form, and thus there is no specific definition for reference other than cloudy, lacking form, and unidentified, according to the dictionary. Exactly 2 months later, October 7th, Pat received a related communication while in conscious state of mind, explaining the nebulous. A voice said, "The nebulous is a code. The code has been broken." Pat saw the whole nebulous, followed by a broken one. I could see a jelly-like stuff that connected the dots, she described. I knew that the nebulous was then something that was in our bodies when we were created. When we were created, we were supposed to have perfect nebulous. This gave us personal contact with our Creator. When the nebulous was broken by disobedience, we no longer had personal contact with our Creator. We had to adapt to living on our own, thus losing our innocence and pure state of being in a human form. This image reinforces Pat's altered understanding of God and spiritual plan. Overall, her experiences with the alien entities have, to the best of her conscious recollection, felt very positive. With a strong religious faith, she has accepted them as angels. In my abduction, she has said, I have never gotten a feeling of evil. In fact, I felt most protected while in the presence of them. Some people may say that the beings have the power to control what you feel and think at the same time of the abduction, which they most certainly do. But I am hanging on to the childlike faith that Jesus tried to teach us and believe that what I felt was true and good. Why would an all-loving God allow little children to be abducted if these beings were evil and meant to do us harm? I don't believe God would allow it. Even so, Pat conceded, there are things which the beings do that seem wrong to us and seem violent. There has been one very disturbing experience, however, which occurred on July 24th, 1993. It involved not only an alien entity, but also what clearly appeared to be two male humans and a human environment. In the early morning hours, Pat awoke very groggy, feeling like she had been drugged and hearing a strange noise very near to her, making this pss, pss, pss sound. Then she remembered the two men had come into her bedroom, carried her outside into a waiting vehicle, a large military truck. She was in a drugged state, merging in and out of consciousness as the truck took off and rode smoothly for 45 minutes to an hour. In her brief lucid moments, Pat heard the men engaged in a low conversation that she couldn't understand. She tried to speak up, but her tongue was thick and unwieldy. When the truck turned left onto a rough surface, Pat came awake again, and in that dark night caught only a glimpse of the countryside out of a large square front windshield. The truck slowed down and finally stopped with the engine running. Through the window, Pat saw they were parked next to a large mound or hillside. Incredibly, she saw a large doorway open upward. The truck pulled inside into this hill. The interior was very dimly lit, but as the vehicle stopped inside, Pat saw a strange being standing as if waiting for their arrival. The being was no more than 3 feet tall, dressed in a black hooded cape. Looking groggily, Pat thought, what is an Oriental girl doing here? And immediately a telepathic message came back from the being. No, you don't like me. No, Pat thought. No, I don't. I don't want to do this again. But they can't break me because they couldn't do it before. When the truck parked and she was assisted out, stepping a long way down from the high passenger compartment, Pat saw that the area was crowded with a dirty feeling, with boxes and junk stacked along the wall. In the middle of the large room was a stainless steel table, more human looking than the tables she remembered from alien encounters. She felt very uneasy. They wanted me to get onto it, she said, but I didn't want to. Not that table. But she did get onto it, although she does not remember much about what happened. The Oriental girl hovered around her, moving close and poking her with some object Pat couldn't see, but she did see the entity's face close to hers. Its skin was a greenish-gray color. When the creature's eyes blinked and its lids met in the middle, Pat said the effect was repugnant, reminded her of a lizard. Her next recollection was of getting down off the table and trying to see what the Oriental girl was doing to her. The entity kept moving around Pat, much to her irritation, making an erratic pat, pss, 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 pss sound. Trying to support herself by holding onto the table, she moved away from the entity, but it continued to poke her. Pat was more alert, but still unsteadied, and as she circled the table, she stubbed her toe painfully against it. Looking down at her foot, she noticed in surprise that the floor was covered in sawdust. God, she thought, this isn't even a real floor. With a bit more awareness, Pat avoided the being as much as she could, feeling that whatever was doing this was sort of torment. Suddenly she blacked out, and she came back to the consciousness in her bed, and the pss pss was audible. Briefly, 2 days later, Pat noticed a slight bruise on her wrist with a red dot or a puncture inside it, and she also saw that one of her toenails had been badly chipped, almost into the quick, as if it had been forcibly struck something hard. I didn't like that situation at all, Pat said, and I knew that it wasn't my first time I had seen that Oriental girl. I've been on that table before, as well, she adds, remembering how uneasy it made her feel. She knew that the greenish-skinned, lizard-eyed being was not human. Even though the men, the truck, the travel, and the underground facility all certainly seemed to be. What kind of aliens, she wondered, are involved with the government or military? What a strange thought at the end. What kind of aliens, she wondered, are involved with the government or military? Shouldn't it be the other way around? What kind of government or military would be involved with aliens? Very strange. And, with things that I've thought about and just really thought about, even when I was a kid, teenager, I used to think that this, well, I had kind of these strange views on things, like maybe we were like kind of some kind of genetic experiment for, whatever. And that was when I was a child, so just I'm imagining every kid has those kind of thoughts. But what a very strange abductees recalling her experience. It's just very strange. I hope you guys enjoyed it, though, as much as I enjoyed it. With that, may the Great Spirit be with us all, and may He guide us down that path that we call life.